The wind started to turn angry just after noon. We'd been following an old fire road through the mountains, the kind of path that looks sturdy until the snowmelt turns it to mush. By the time the first sleet started cutting sideways, we knew we were in trouble. There were 4 of us, me, Emily, Tanner and an older guy named Ross, who swore he'd done this route plenty of times before. We'd been aiming for a campsite near a frozen lake, but the clouds were rolling so fast they looked alive. And the air had that heavy stillness that always comes right before weather breaks bad. Within minutes, rain turned to hail, and then the hail turned to full snow, thick, wet flakes slapping our hoods. Tanner's GPS said we were still 2 miles from the lake, but none of us could see more than 20 yards ahead. Emily's hands had gone numb. Ross kept mumbling something about following the creek down, but the roar of wind swallowed his words. We were soaked to the bone, packs heavy with slush. I remember thinking how quickly control slips away in the wilderness. One moment you're fine, and the next you're counting every breath, just trying to keep moving. Then, out of the blur, like some kind of apparition, a roofline appeared through the storm. It was barely visible between the swaying pines, a dark shape with a chimney and shuttered windows. As we got closer, the outline sharpened into a log cabin, old, sturdy, with a heavy steel door and a porch half buried in snowdrift. There was a sign nailed above the steps, words nearly hidden by ice. Property of the Forest Warden Service, closed for season. We stood there, blinking through the snow, too cold to speak. The place looked perfect. Stacked firewood under a tarp, smoke-blackened chimney, even a propane tank half covered at the back. But the latch on the door was padlocked and the shutters nailed tight. Ross was the first to speak. "If we stay out here, we'll freeze." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. It was one of those moments when everyone's thinking the same thing, but no one wants to say it. Breaking in meant shelter, warmth, maybe survival, but it also meant trespassing, property damage, and whatever fines came after. Emily looked at me, her face pale and raw from the wind. "What do we do?" she asked. I stared at the lock. Ice crusted over it and felt the sting of snow on my cheeks. The moral part of my brain was still trying to argue, but the rest of me, cold, tired, human, just wanted heat. Ross didn't wait for a vote. He yanked his multi-tool from his pocket and started hammering at the padlock with the flat end. Each strike made a dull, metallic clank that disappeared into the howl of the wind. I wanted to stop him, really I did, but the sight of Emily shaking uncontrollably silenced any protest. Tanner and I exchanged a glance, both understanding that unspoken line between what's right and what keeps you alive was about to blur, beyond recognition. The lock gave after a dozen hits, falling into the snow with a muted thud. Ross shoved his shoulder against the door and it creaked open with the reluctant groan of old hinges. The smell hit us first. Stale wood smoke, mouse droppings, maybe a trace of kerosene, but it was dry and that was all that mattered. We tumbled inside like a pack of half-drowned animals, stamping our boots and pulling off soaked gloves. The cabin was simple. A wood stove in the centre, bunks against one wall, shelves lined with dusty cans of food and first aid supplies. Tanner closed the door behind us, and for a moment the silence was deafening. Outside, the wind screamed through the trees. Inside, it was just the faint hiss of snowflakes melting off our coats. Emily was the first to cry, just a short, shaky sound, half relief and half disbelief. I found matches in a tin near the stove, and within minutes the fire crackled to life, throwing orange light across the log walls. We peeled off layers, steam rising from our clothes. The warmth crept back slowly, painful at first, like blood returning to frozen fingers. None of us spoke much. There was a strange tension in the air, gratitude mixed with guilt. Every creak of the cabin felt like an accusation. I ran my hand along a shelf stacked with canned beans and coffee, noticing a handwritten inventory list pinned above it. "Warden's Post," I murmured. "They probably stock it for the next season." Ross shrugged, staring into the fire. "Then we'll replace what we use. Leave a note. We're not stealing, we're surviving." He was right, of course, but that didn't ease the knot in my chest. We were uninvited guests in someone else's sanctuary, taking warmth that wasn't ours to take. Still, as I watched the storm rage through the frosted window, I couldn't imagine stepping back into that cold. Outside, night was falling fast and the snow piled higher against the porch. I closed the shutters and threw another log on the fire. "We'll make it right," I said quietly, more to myself than to anyone else. "Tomorrow, when it's safe." Morning came slowly, grey and silent. I woke to the faint crackle of dying embers and the steady hiss of wind against the shuttered windows. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. The wooden ceiling above me, the smell of smoke, the heavy stillness, it all felt dreamlike, until the ache in my shoulders reminded me that yesterday hadn't been a dream at all. Ross was already up, sitting near the stove and feeding it the last of the dry logs. Tanner snored softly on the bottom bunk, and Emily was still bundled in her sleeping bag, her face barely visible. The storm had eased, but not ended. Through the small gaps in the shutters, I could see the pale light of a snow-choked world. "Coffee?" Ross asked quietly. He held up a dented metal percolator, steam curling from its spout. I nodded, sitting up and rubbing my neck. He poured a cup, and I took it gratefully, feeling the warmth soak through my fingers. The air inside was thick with unspoken thoughts. We were alive, miraculously so, but we all knew the price of that survival. On the table lay the broken padlock, its shank twisted and blackened from Ross's blows. Every time I looked at it, guilt flared like static in my chest. When Emily stirred, we made a quiet breakfast. Instant oatmeal from our packs and a can of peaches from the shelf. Tanner insisted on leaving that can open, its syrupy contents divided evenly among us. "We'll pay for it," he said, trying to make it sound light. But the words didn't erase the feeling of trespass. After we ate, we took stock. The shelves were lined with supplies, a full medkit, blankets, canned goods, even fuel. Whoever maintained the place took pride in it. Everything was labelled, dated, orderly. There was a small framed photo above the desk, a man in a ranger's jacket smiling beside a golden retriever. A handwritten note beneath read, "Warden Thomas Ellery, duty cabin closed winters." Emily stared at that photo for a long time. "He probably comes back every spring," she said softly. "Imagine walking in and finding strangers used your place." Ross sighed, rubbing his beard. "Better that than finding bodies in the snow." Still, the tension lingered. I could feel the weight of that photo watching us, like we were being silently judged. Every small thing we touched, every can moved, every log burned, seemed to carry a moral cost. By noon, the storm eased enough to venture outside. The world was transformed, snow up to our knees, pines heavy with white, the air sharp and clean. We spent an hour gathering deadwood and stacking it by the porch, trying to replace what we'd used. It didn't feel like enough. When I came back in, Emily was writing something in her notebook. "We'll leave a letter," she said, "and cash, whatever we have. It's the least we can do." Ross nodded. Tanner didn't answer. He was staring out the window, watching the clouds gather again over the ridge. By the next evening, the snow had stopped, leaving the world buried under a silent white ocean. The air was so still it felt sacred, like the forest itself was holding its breath. We'd spent most of the day drying our gear and taking turns outside to shovel a path to the tree line. The decision loomed between us, unspoken but heavy. Do we leave tomorrow or wait one more day to be sure? Ross wanted to stay put, said the drifts could hide creeks and that he wasn't about to lose someone on the way out. Tanner, restless as always, argued that staying too long only made things worse. "We've already crossed the line," he said, pacing near the stove. "If they find us here, it's breaking and entering, doesn't matter why." Emily said nothing at first. She was still hunched over the notebook she'd started the day before, her handwriting neat despite the cold. Finally, she looked up and said, "We go at first light. We'll leave the place better than we found it, and we'll make sure whoever owns it knows that." So we prepared. We swept the floor, refilled the wood box with what little we'd managed to collect, and tidied every shelf we'd touched. I patched the broken latch as best I could using wire from my repair kit, looping it so the next warden would know it hadn't been forced carelessly. The cabin looked almost untouched when we finished. Almost. But you could always tell when people had been somewhere they weren't supposed to be. There's a certain human fingerprint that lingers, invisible but unmistakable. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fire was down to coals, glowing faintly in the dark, and the others breathed softly around me. My mind kept circling the same thought. If we hadn't found this cabin, we might have died out there. That simple truth cut through all the moral noise, but still, I felt the eyes of that photograph, Warden Ellery and his golden retriever, fixed on me in quiet reproach. I got up, wrapped in my blanket, and stood by the frosted window. Moonlight washed the snow in shades of silver. I could see our boot tracks leading from the woods, already half filled by drifting powder. By morning, they'd be gone entirely, as if we'd never been there. Something about that comforted me. When I turned back, Emily was awake. "Can't sleep," she whispered. "Just thinking," I said. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "You did the right thing breaking in, you know. We all did. Right thing, wrong way maybe. But we're alive. That counts." I nodded, but the words didn't settle easily. There's a strange kind of guilt that comes with survival, the kind that doesn't fade just because you're warm again. Outside, the wind began to rise once more, brushing snow from the eaves in soft, whispering sighs. Dawn came clear and cold, the kind of morning where every sound feels sharpened by frost. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Our gear was stiff with cold, but at least it was dry. We moved slowly, each of us wrapped in that quiet tension that comes before goodbye, goodbye to shelter, to safety, and to the strange moral fog that had hung over us since the moment we broke that lock. Before leaving, Emily placed her notebook on the table beside the stove. The last page held the letter she'd written. "To whoever keeps this cabin, thank you. We found it by chance in a storm that could have taken us. We used your firewood, a can of peaches and one bag of coffee. We swept, restocked and repaired what we could. Enclosed is what we hope covers the cost and our gratitude. You saved 4 lives." She slipped a folded $100 bill beneath it, weighted by the broken padlock. Ross stood beside her, hat in hand. "You sure that's enough?" he asked. "It's all we've got between us," Tanner said. "If it isn't, maybe the note will make up the rest." We stood there for a moment longer, none of us quite ready to open that door. The cabin was warm now, glowing softly in the morning light that filtered through cracks in the shutters. For a brief second, I understood how people grow attached to places they don't own, how something borrowed in desperation can still feel sacred. When we finally stepped outside, the cold hit like a slap, sharp and honest. Our boots sank deep into the fresh snow as we retraced the faintest trace of the old trail. Behind us, the cabin sat quiet and small beneath the pines, smoke curling from its chimney for the last time before the wind swallowed it. The hike out took most of the day. We spoke little, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Once, Tanner looked back over his shoulder and said, "Do you think we'll get in trouble for it?" Ross chuckled. "Maybe. But if that warden's half the man he looks like in that photo, he'll understand." When we finally reached the main road, the world felt impossibly loud again. Cars hissing over slush, birds calling in the distance, the dull hum of civilization returning. I felt lighter, but not entirely clean. Some debts aren't paid in cash or labour. They linger, quiet reminders of the thin line between survival and morality. Weeks later, at home, I kept thinking about that cabin. I pictured Warden Ellery unlocking the door in spring, seeing the swept floor, the stacked firewood, and that note on the table. Maybe he'd frown first, maybe even curse, but then maybe he'd just pour himself a cup of coffee, read Emily's handwriting, and nod once before pinning the letter to the wall. And maybe that's all survival really is. Doing what you must, and then doing what you can to make it right.